All right, boys and girls, this is a special edition of the Big Ben Show, coming to you from wonderful, beautiful California and Palo Alto, where only about 20% of the students outside are still wearing masks. But, you know, how many days is it to stop the spread? And I am happy to be joined by the Daily Wire's own Brent Scher, who is somebody who I've been reading for quite a while during his career at the Free Beacon. He's now the head potentate of the DC brand of the Daily Wire, which has been quite effective in covering the early stages of the second Trump term. Brent, it is great to have the opportunity to sit down with you in person.
Yeah, Ben, it's great to be here. It's great to be in Palo Alto.
Mm-hmm. What do you like the most about this place?
The trees, honestly. I'm a New York City boy. Being around and seeing real nature is pretty big for me. I would say that you're a bit underselling the amount of masks I'm seeing on Stanford students. It's just all Stanford students on bicycles wearing masks.
E-scooters wearing a mask is quite a thing. It's just like, I don't understand this. It's just not something. But, you know, everyone has their right to make their choices. My body, my choice, they say.
They certainly do, and it's sad because you know they're such smart kids.
So, Brent, I want to talk to you about a couple of different things. But first off, I just want to ask you a question about the work of journalism as it relates to covering this White House. You have lived through a couple of different presidential administrations in which you saw the way that they were covered and the different demands that were put in place. But the Trump administrations are different in a lot of different ways. When it comes to this second Trump term, what are the things that really stand out to you as a different approach from the press office, the comms office, people who are tasked with covering this White House, which has obviously made a ton of changes to the press pool and to other ways that they are processing different journalists who are in the room? You know, when it comes to running that coverage, what are some of the changes that you've had to deal with?
From Trump 1, where I actually attempted to be a White House reporter and failed, it was the biggest, most chaotic journalism experience of my life. I was the White House reporter for the Free Beacon for about 4 months in the Sean Spicer era of just, and I don't put this on Sean, it was chaos. Trump 2 is a completely different animal. And I think that's because the people that came in from Trump 2, including Donald Trump himself, knew what the White House was, knew what sort of people you needed. And this White House is not even comparable when it comes to competency and intentionality. They know what they're doing. I remember during Trump 1, you'd have like Infrastructure Week that became a 4-year-long meme because Infrastructure Week turned into the most chaotic, who knows what scandals broke and whether Scaramucci got fired, who knows. Trump 2 is the opposite. When they tell you what they are doing, that is what they're doing. And if the media, and when I say the media, I more mean the establishment legacy media, they all, no matter what the White House wants, they choose what the news cycle is, in their opinion. And they will ask all the same questions and they will cover all the same things on their nightly broadcasts. The White House does not care. They stay on message. They ignore that noise. And it's something in Trump 1 they had no ability to do. The noise, they felt the necessity to respond to it. Trump now is above that and feels above that. And him and Caroline Leavitt and I'd say some of his cabinet officials, definitely Pete Hegseth, they know what they're doing on a given day. They know what message they want the press to have, and that's the message they give, and they don't care what CBS wants to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is that they have perspective in a way that it seems like the first Trump term didn't, where like someone like Michael Wolff could come along and just like blow up the narrative for the White House for like a week. I feel like this time around, when something like that happens, and it still does happen, they just do not give a crap about it. They're much more focused on their narrative in a way, and they'll sometimes address it, but it's usually with like a dismissive sometimes rude attitude intentionally, I think, as opposed to like getting into a back and forth, tit for tat kind of thing with everybody who comes along with some story to tell.
Yeah. I mean, the most obvious and recent example is when the Huffington Post was obsessed in the last few days of asking the Trump White House why it chose Budapest for the meeting between Zelensky and Putin. And his response, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with this, was who made the decision was their question. And the White House response was your mom, to a Huffington Post reporter. I'll say, though, I think the biggest difference from 2016 to 2024 isn't actually only the White House and Donald Trump. It's actually the external forces. I mean, I'm biased to the Daily Wire because that's my most pressing concern at every minute of the day. But in 2016, the Daily Wire had existed for 1 year. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary.
And I should say primarily at that point, you were effectively just a podcast network.
Yeah, sure. And the conservative media, I mean, not that it didn't exist, it existed, but it was in its infancy. And through a term of Trump and then a term of Biden, it's now a real thing, not just conservative media, but the conservative podcast industry. It is real, and that gives the Trump administration the ability to rise above what the New York Times and Washington Post and CBS want to talk about because they don't decide the news narrative every day. Ben Shapiro and you and, everybody else with a platform has input, and we want to talk about what the people in America actually care about, not what the New York Times cares about. So a lot of credit to the Trump administration for sensing this, but there was something built in the 8 years between when Trump first took office and when he took office for the second time that he couldn't do what he's doing now in 2017.
Well, I think one example of that really sticks out to me is the difference in the treatment between the resistance efforts, say the Women's March of the early days of the first Trump term and the follow-on coverage and everything that came out of that versus what we just saw with this No Kings protest, another large group of people. It's good for baby boomers to get their vitamin D and get outside and see the landscape. But I do think that the coverage is notably different. It is one where there is an acknowledgement, even by some of the participants, that like this isn't going to really change anything. And I think you also see it, by the way, in the lack of control that the Democrats have for the narrative surrounding this government shutdown. That in the past, the effectiveness of MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, et cetera, their coverage could have perhaps put all the blame on Donald Trump. But as Harry Enton of CNN himself, has said, Trump's approval rating has actually gone up since the shutdown started, and he's not being blamed for it, which to me is something that speaks to the fact that people have really it's not so much that they've turned off or completely tuned out these news sources. They just take everything they say as not necessarily being the truth anymore. They're still watching to some degree, not everybody, obviously, but they're still, aware of it. It's just that they don't assume this is the biggest thing in the world just because the New York Times says that it is.
And that goes to my point that I was saying before. This year, the Daily Wire was at the No Kings March. And we put out a video. In 2 days, it has, I think, 4.5 million views on Instagram.
That's awesome.
And it's just asking the attendees, like, hey, why are you here? And why do you think Trump is a king? And they, of course, have no answer. And it's absurd because Trump's not a king. He was elected. And it's just...
He won the popular vote.
Yeah, it's just this absurd, funny video. But so it's again, that we exist. There are people there, and it's not just us. There were every creator, social media creator in the world was at these No Kings March asking these people questions. That wasn't there at the Women's March in January 2017. And then additionally, regarding the polls, there's a new confidence to the Trump administration. Trump knows that his policies and what he's saying is receptive to at least half of the voting public. I'd argue actually more, given what Democrats are doing with the shutdown, which is not popular and makes absolutely zero sense from anybody who's followed politics and is being honest about it. The shutdown stance that the Democrats hold right now is nonsense. Trump knows that, and he knows that the American people can't be as fooled as they were in Trump 1 and just ages of the past. And that lets him operate with a different, sense of urgency on the things that he cares about. I mean, during this shutdown, he negotiated Middle East peace. It's not the shutdown, and Schumer's antics aren't consuming Trump. They're not consuming the White House. I don't think the White House cares. They want the government open because this is absurdity, but it's not changing their day to day.
I think one of the other things that really factors into this that we should appreciate is that the shift in narrative has outside effects, not just on the way that the center of America views things or the right views things, but on the way that the left views things as well. I think in an environment where you had the New York Times and all of these other major institutions as powerful as they were, the possibility of having your party taken over by some of these young and inspirational socialists and truly, in some cases, Marxists, was something that was, not a realistic possibility, that they could always prevent them, that Bernie was never going to get the nomination. They were always going to be able to step in and stop this. I think now we're in this moment, and maybe it is a moment, or maybe it's something that's a new reality, and that's my question to you, where these establishment entities no longer have any power to gatekeep and to prevent the kind of craziness from coming out from their own left flank in a way that they can't really control and that they're afraid of on a certain level. Do you think that that's something that is going to endure, or is it a temporary reality where those old forces, the empire will strike back, the forces will reassert themselves to manage the Democratic coalition the way that they have in the past?
I'm trying to run these parallels in my head because what's interesting here is the Republicans dealt with that.
Yes.
In 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And they failed to control those forces. And the result was Donald Trump. And 8 years later, the result is the first time Republicans win the popular vote in decades. Mm-hmm. The most, I would argue, successful Republican administration also in decades. With
the most diverse coalition as well in decades. I mean, you're going back, arguably you're going all the way back to like HW 88 to find something equivalent.
It's a revolutionary coalition of voters that was impossible in 2008, in 2012, and even in 2016. The 2024 coalition is different than 2016. So I see where the Democrats are freaking out. And the reason they're freaking out is because what losing control means to them is that control goes to AOC and Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and Zohran Mamdani. And to any rational thinker, that is bad because those people are politically and also certifiably crazy. I mean, what Zohran Mamdani is saying and proposing in New York City is insanity. It is full-blown socialism, communism, everything what he's saying about Israel, that he would take Benjamin Netanyahu if he ever arrives in New York at the UN and arrest him on day one. I understand why they are very terrified of that wing of the party taking over. I think Republicans probably feared the same thing in 2015. I would argue that it's not the same. Trump is not as crazy as they acted like he is. He is basically doing anything that any conventional Republican in 2015 right now would have wanted him to do. He is checking every box on the wish list.
Literally, the only people who could object to it are economists over tariff policy and some of the other things. But really, I think that, I mean, if that's the only place that you're finding fault, then he's still, completely within the Republican coalition. And almost every Republican president has used tariffs at some point.
Yeah, and even on that, I mean, my argument on tariffs is that from a purist economic standpoint, I see the criticism, but we're also talking about Middle East peace, and a lot of the things he's done around the world and what his supporters would argue, and I think they have a very good point here, is that what the tariffs did was instantly put the United States in a negotiation phase with every single country in the world. And once you're negotiating the terms of not just tariffs, but all negotiations, because everything was on the table in Donald Trump's tariff negotiations, that is what put him in a position to realign the Middle East into a place where all of a sudden the calculations in these Gulf states is to support Donald Trump and Israel against Hamas and the terrorists. I mean, I think most people, even who are economic purists, would understand that trade-off. And again, that's what I say. There's this new confidence of the Trump administration where they're not necessarily freaking out about 2 to 3 weeks of intense criticism from very smart conservatives who are worried about tariffs. Trump calls them, panicans, and they move on. And then a few weeks later, he secures Middle East peace. And he's like, see, everything's going to be okay.
You are a New Yorker yourself, born in Manhattan?
Born in Manhattan.
And you are a long-suffering Jets and Mets fan, I believe.
This is true.
A rough season. My condolences. The question that I have for you about this Zoran situation: how much can he actually do? Meaning, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that he is not performative in his positioning. That this democratic socialism runs deep, and that the positions that he's taking now in order to mitigate some of the different, coverage of his past positions and the like, that's the act. When he gets into the mayor's office and actually has the ability to apply these things, how much will he really be able to do? And what's the worst thing that you're worried about when it comes to the city that you love?
Mamdani is truly terrifying to me for New York. And I say that while acknowledging that there might not be that much he can actually do. I say this to a lot of people. We survived Bill de Blasio, who was certifiably as radical as Zoran Mamdani.
But with the caveat that Bill was high a lot of the time, which mitigates a little bit of your ability to apply those policies.
And I hear from my New Yorker friends, and I grew up there. I went to high school there. All of my friends still live there. They're all Democrats, and I talk to them about Zoran Mamdani, and they always tell me, well, he's not a king. There's still a city council he needs to deal with. But the city council is filled with radicals as well. And I think the most concerning thing for New York is that there are 45% of voters who are not terrified by what Mamdani is saying, because the next Mamdani will be even crazier, because now you have this permission from the voting
Overton
base.
window that is redefined.
It's spread where democratic socialism is now what being a Democrat in New York City means, and I don't think that's surprising. I mean, AOC is the most popular Democrat in New York City by far. We always talk about the AOC versus Schumer Senate primary that might be right on the horizon. I don't think Schumer stands a chance. And if it was a New York City primary, Schumer wouldn't get, 8 votes. So that's the biggest concern, is what it means for the next generation of New York. And I just don't buy this idea that there are safeguards to stop Mamdani. I mean, one of the things he said he wants to do is he wants to get rid of all gifted and talented programs in New York City schools. I'm a product of gifted and talented. I went to New York City public schools my whole life. probably the reason why I came out a smart, well-adjusted person, at least in most people's opinions. Maybe not yours, Ben.
Humble brag.
But it's probably because of those. He wants to get rid of them and basically bring everybody to the baseline terrible education in New York City. He can do that, and he will do that. And that's a disaster. That's not just a 3-year disaster. It's a generational disaster that's going to hurt New Yorkers and make it an even worse city than it is now, which is terrifying because I think it's the best city in the world.
You take the ballerina and you put all the chains on her so she can't dance. I'm not calling you the ballerina, but so Brent, one thing that I do hear from my friends in New York, including friends who have young children, who use public transportation, particularly the subway, is that they're very concerned about what he's going to do with cops in New York and what his policies in general will lead to in terms of where cops are willing to go. We've seen this happen in other cities all across the country where blue mayors basically get in charge. You have prosecutors who are Soros-backed and ideologically leftist and extreme, won't charge anybody, lower everything in terms of the bar of penalties for being a criminal. And ultimately, that leads to changes in human behavior. How much of that is a concern for you? And for the listeners who are in New York, and we do have a good number of them, how concerned should they be about the safety of something like the subway if Zoran, starts applying his policies?
I mean, he said at a debate last week that he's never argued for defunding the police. And then people plopped on him 50 posts on X where he straight up says the police are evil. We need to defund them. They're racist. They're everything. We need to just get rid of them.
You know what? We do need to have an invention. Maybe Palmer Luckey or maybe Elon can do this, where we have those glasses you could put on that just community note as people are talking.
And that's concerning in itself. The level of sociopath that you need to be to, even for a politician, to say that lie while you know that there is on the record not deleted expos of you saying exactly what you're saying you've never said. But at least I guess it's reassuring that he's now saying that he's never said that he wants to get rid of the police. Eric Adams has been, and this is as bad as the New York City is right now, he's a pretty pro-police guy. He's dealing with a lot of forces in his own party that he's now a little less receptive to because his party threw him in the trash. But he's a guy who wants safety. And I think every New Yorker wants safety. But that's where I'm saying it's concerning that the people don't really care. I mean, the people voting for Zoran, you'd at least hope, but it's not true, are the ones you're guessing are riding the subway. The truth is that, and this happens in so many cities, the people that vote in these socialists whose policies are going to have the worst impact on the poorest and lowest echelons of cities, they're not actually the ones voting for Zoran. It's the rich people on, the Upper East Side who, love Zoran on Instagram, but would never dream to step into the New York City subway. And the people who are commuting there every day to and from work, they're the ones who are going to suffer. And it's brutal. It's sad. And I hope it doesn't happen. It's also ironic that he's running against, and I know a lot of Republicans don't want him in the race, but Curtis Sliwa, who has spent the last 40 years dedicated to cleaning up the subways. I took the subway to school, middle school, high school, my whole life. And the guardian angels legitimately saved me from getting mugged numerous times. Wow. You'd see the guy coming in with the red beret, and it means that whoever is trying to take money from you is walking away. And Mamdani represents the opposite of that, and it's sad.
I saw a reference to Curtis Sliwa recently on X that he really was a character from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I have to say, he does kind of seem like that.
He absolutely is. And he's like a purely New York character. Curtis couldn't exist in any other city. I have a lot of sympathy with Curtis. There are a lot of people telling him that he has no place in the race. But for somebody who's fought for New York City for 50 years, telling him that he needs to get out so that Andrew Cuomo could have a better chance, it's like the most offensive thing. And I'm not sure whether he's doing the right thing in the long run of insisting that he's staying in, but it's hard to tell him he's doing the wrong thing.
And Andrew Cuomo is just such a scumbag. It's not it's, there's.
And for New York City, I mean, really, is it that much better? Maybe it's, I've seen people make the argument that New Yorkers deserve Zohran Mamdani and they shouldn't get Andrew Cuomo, who's like basically just a gateway into the next Zohran Mamdani. They need to see what this is. As somebody who loves New York and has family in New York and wants to go back, hopefully in years where the Jets or Mets have successful seasons, I don't really want to make that trade away. I don't want them to suffer for 4 years just to learn a lesson. But I see the argument.
You and I are both, we're both children of the 80s. Are you 89?
The very last year, so, 1989.
Yes. We have a perspective that is different from Gen Z for a number of different reasons. But the elder millennial perspective, as you know, is one that included the transition from the analog to the digital, from a world without the internet to a world with the internet, and the ubiquity of cell phones versus the giant box that Michael Douglas is holding up to his head in Wall Street. That's all obviously a huge transition. But the other thing that we have in common as 80s babies is that every 80s kid remembers 9/11 as being a pivotal event. For me, it came when I was in college at 19. For you, it came when you were 12 and you were in school in New York. Now looking back, it obviously informed and changed so many courses and paths that have led us to this point in terms of this Trump administration. You've got Pete, you've got JD, you've got Tulsi. You have all these figures who basically experienced the consequences of different policies and experienced it in different ways, have different attitudes toward it, but also gained perspective from it that is now being applied, within this administration. Looking back on the reaction to 9/11, to your own personal feelings as a New Yorker, what are the things that you take away from it now with some added perspective and length of time as an adult? And do you believe that it's a particularly important thing to have people who lived through the consequences of decisions that were made for good and for ill afterwards be in those positions now, in a generational shift that we really have seen non-existent within the Democratic Party to a large extent, and within the Republican Party really was limited until this term?
You talk about cell phones, and just the first point, I remember it was me and probably every single other teen, or I was 12 years old, so near teen in New York City. We all got cell phones a month after 9/11 because it was insane not being able to talk to your family that week.
I had a beeper before 9/11, and then I had a cell phone after that.
I got a little Motorola. It was orange. I'll never forget it. I probably got it in October 2001. I'll say, this 9/11 was different for me as I'm editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire now. I oversee a staff, and a lot of my staff is Gen Z, and a lot of my top reporters who I view as these, smart, worldly people, and it's not to no fault of their own. They weren't alive, or they were alive, and 5 years old and not know what's going on. And it's so hard to explain to them. Actually, this 9/11 was a bit different because we had this massive slate of coverage that was ready to put out. And then on September 10th, Charlie Kirk got assassinated, which kind of threw a wrench into everything. And we pivoted, as every newsroom in America did, at least on the right. I think 9/11 is one of the most important things for everybody to understand and internalize and think about when they're thinking about policy. the isolationist view that we shouldn't care about what's happening outside of the borders of the United States is pretty instantly shattered when you think that just a few people from outside of the United States changed the course of history on 9/11 and killed thousands of people. I also think that when you think about Donald Trump and what he's trying to do in a lot of these agencies, and I don't only mean DOJ, but almost everything, I think there is this new Republican focus on efficiency and competency and not caring about the woke crap that for so many years in the past 10 years has driven what we do and the decisions that we make. When you really look back at 9/11, and you don't need some new podcast to do that, there's incredible coverage. The Looming Tower is one of my favorite books ever written. That book is a book about incompetency, and it's incompetency at the FBI and the CIA, and it's from really smart people who maybe meant the best, but they weren't sharing information, and they got a lot of things wrong that led to the biggest tragedy in United States history. Anything that Trump's doing and any resistance to it to make these agencies smarter and more efficient, you really need to stop and think that these things have real consequences. It is important that our government operates at the highest possible level because the consequences of not doing so are so catastrophic. And I don't want another Looming Tower written ever again that just focuses on what a bunch of smart people got wrong because of internal squibbles. So I just think everybody needs to know that and understand that. One of my favorite radio hosts of all time, Hugh Hewitt, actually asks every guest that's ever on his show.
I was able to answer yes.
I'm proud of you. A lot of people were not, but whether they read The Looming Tower, and it's not just a little, parlor trick. It's because it's so important that you understand that and you understand that history. And even if you're a young reporter who wasn't alive for it, it's a formational event in the United States. And it means, it certainly affects Donald Trump a lot. He's a New Yorker too who saw it.
So let me close with this. I think the big question that relates to this is about the conflict that we see recurring we saw it within the first Trump administration, less so within this one, though I'm sure we're going to get more of it, where you have a pattern of bureaucratic resistance to the people who are put in charge. And then they become either whistleblowers or behind the scenes, resistance figures who come forward and they give the public interview to MSNBC or CNN, and they depict themselves as standing up for something they believe is important, as Donald Trump and his minions are working to undermine the United States and its power and everything else. To me, the lesson of the Looming Tower and the lesson of so many of these histories that are written about mistakes that are made by the smartest people, the brightest minds in government, is that the bureaucrats who think they're the smartest men in the room, maybe they are, but they also work for the President of the United States. They serve at his pleasure, and the people who are under him, who are appointed over them, are the people who they need to listen to when they're applying policy. To me, that was just one of the major storylines of the first administration. It's one that obviously resulted in one of the impeachments that happened against him. And I think it's a recurring problem. Do you have a solution for this? Not just for this presidency, but for the future administrations that are going to tackle the same issues? Because no matter what DOJ does, no matter what this president does, they're going to walk into a room in the Oval and have an administrative state underneath them, if they have an R right after their name, that is going to resist everything that they try to do, particularly when it comes to American authority and power.
I wish I had a better policy prescription for the future, and maybe while I'm giving my first answer, I'll come up with one. But I will say just this. The United States a few months ago conducted the most wide-scale coordinated attack since at least the Iraq War, and maybe more than that, when it launched, I think 16 B-2 bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri to take out the Iranian nuclear program. It was the most coordinated thing. The amount of people that knew about it is insane. Not only they flew some B-2 bombers east, some B-2 bombers west. They needed tankers to refuel them. They needed F-16s the entire way to Iran for both the decoys and the real ones to make sure that they were protected. The amount of people that must have known about that is insane, and not a single reporter did. And when we talk about, to tie this all back to the beginning, differences between 2016 and 2024, there is no chance that would have happened in 2017.
Not a chance in hell.
We would have known about it, and we would have had people leaking about their qualms about what Trump's doing and whether this is smart. This time, and it's a credit to Pete Hegseth, it's a credit to Donald Trump, there was full operational security. And while there may be some people who have left this administration and maybe critics, although I got to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't think of a 2025 resistance figure that came from inside the administration. And I mean, it's only been 10 months or I don't even know if it's been 10 months. Right now, everything's nice. And we were talking about this yesterday. If it stays this way, I think it's where it just becomes a nice, calm, transitional phase to a J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio continuation of a coordinated, united administration behind an America First, Make America Great Again agenda. Things can go catastrophically wrong. The Israeli peace deal could fall apart completely. Hamas is already being crazy. The economy could collapse. The midterms could give Democrats control of the House again. Things can happen. But right now, I mean, there is not a legitimate resistance outside of like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. And that's not significant.
No. I think that this is the real test. If you can get through this administration having proven that you can do these kinds of things, that you can achieve them, then I think it creates a new standard of expectation. We've had this kind of built-in assumption that Republican admins screw this stuff up time and time again because they have, frankly, in our lifetimes. But this one is setting a new standard, and we'll see if they can uphold it.
It's funny. We talk like in the NFL. There's always the question of, whether you start a rookie quarterback in his first year, give him a year on the bench. I don't know that the model for future presidencies is you let him have a term and then, a loss and get him to stew on the sidelines for 4 years and then come back with this new perspective. But for Donald Trump, it really has been something a little bit special. You know that he was sitting there very angry because he thinks the election was, taken from him unjustly. But while that was happening, him and others around him, like Stephen Miller, were thinking about, man, if we have another chance in the White House, here's what we're going to do. And they got the coaching, they're coached up, and they're ready to go. And it's like a second-year quarterback, and they're killing it.
It's the Harbaugh model. Rebuild at Michigan and then come back. We'll see. Brent, thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show on a special bonus episode today.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more on the next episode of the Big Ben Show, and we will discuss many things with our guests that we have lined up about a number of different topics, especially going into the Virginia elections, which are coming up just shortly. We have Attorney General Mayorkas next week. I'm looking forward to that interview. Obviously, that race has taken hold of the conversation nationally. Appreciate you tuning in as always, and I hope you'll leave a comment, a review, and give us your feedback. We always appreciate it. Follow The Big Ben Show on X at Big Ben Show Fox on Instagram as well. And of course, I hope you'll follow me as well and give me your feedback at B Domenech. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.